I'd like to introduce our panel. Vice President of EGA and founding President of PRISM, Psychedelic Research in Science and Medicine, Martin Williams. Next to Martin, we have Stephen Bright of PRISM as well, and he's also a, I was meant to write this in front of me, psychotherapy?
Psychologist.
Psychologist, okay. Psychologist, welcome, Stephen. Next to Stephen, Harm Reduction Victoria's DanceWise Coordinator, Ptsd. I don't think I've ever actually pronounced your last name, but... and President of the Australian Sex Party, Fiona Patton, on the far end there. I wanted to start on just a couple of points because there's a few topical things that have come up just in the past week that I thought were interesting, and that was we just had Anzac Day last week, and a few stories popped up about a lot of our returning veterans from overseas who are coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder, and this has popped up again, and we know that there is a potential for MDMA to help treat treatment-resistant post-traumatic stress disorder. That sort of didn't get covered really, but don't expect it to. And the other thing is just today was the release of the illicit drug data report from the Australian Crime Commission, and we found out that congratulations Australia, we've had the most cannabis arrests ever, 62,120. You can applaud that if you want. 565 national hallucinogen arrests, that's their word, highest on record as well. And in reading the report, I found this quote great. This is the one thing they said about the effects of LSD. Short-term effects of LSD may include extreme emotional swings, fear, panic, and paranoia. Long-term effects of LSD use may include flashbacks, impaired memory and concentration, and increased potential risk of mental illness. So that it paints a real good picture that we've seen how accurate they are with that picture. But with the panel, I wanted to start by getting some pragmatic stuff out of the way first. Somebody from PRISM, either of you can talk about it. Where are we at in Australia with MDMA for PTSD treatment?
Okay, fresh out of PRISM, thanks. PRISM. Let's see. Well, PRISM was founded at the end of the beginning of 2011, following an Entheogenesis Australis conference here in Melbourne, and Rick Doblin, who's the president of MAPS, director of MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, was our guest. We had a little forum and we decided that MAPS were doing a fantastic job initiating psychedelic research, and particularly with MDMA for PTSD. And we felt we really had the enthusiasm and probably the skills, even though it was very early days, to try and get something happening here in Australia as well. So 2011 was really a sort of big year for trying to get a clinical trial protocol underway, or at least formulated so that we could put it to an ethics committee and get the ball rolling. We did that in the beginning of 2012, and we were knocked back by, it was the only independent, fully non-institutionally aligned ethics committee in Australia, as far as we know, based in Adelaide. And they had some concerns about the protocol overall, but particularly about the psychotherapist team that we had on board. And it turns out that I think their concerns were well-founded. So from the middle of 2012 to now, we've continued to work towards getting the right team in place. And it's hard to put a timeline on it, but I'd like to think that we've actually had some fantastic developments within the last 6 months in terms of getting some people involved and on board, and we're hoping that within probably the next 6 to 12 months we might be able to get the full team together to go back to an ethics committee and then go through the further process.
I just want to quote yourself at you, Martin, for a second from a Vice interview. You said the Australian academic research system is based almost entirely on public funding, and aversion to the risk of funding cuts or denial of promotion is a very significant factor. Another factor is that extensive PTSD research has already been conducted within other treatment paradigms, and researchers tend to become set in their ways and consequently resistant to alternatives that might challenge their established programs. So finding somebody is the hard part. How are you going with that? How are you overcoming that?
Did I say that?
Sorry, yeah, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah, it's slow going, I have to say. As I said in that Vice interview, there's a stigma about psychedelic research, which probably won't be any great surprise to anybody in this room, I suspect. But it's really a matter of taking sort of small baby steps all the way through and putting together the team very carefully to ensure that everybody who is involved is very comfortable with the prospect of doing the research, but also the potential sort of public profile that might accrue as well. And so really we need to have people who are comfortable in their own research sort of field, in their own research career, as well as therapists who are comfortable in their own therapy or therapeutic career to come on board. And as I say, that's going to take some time. At this stage, we haven't identified a research group within an academic or a hospital setting that would be well enough established and closely enough aligned to our sort of interest and our perspective, I guess, to go ahead with that. However, we live in hope, and the more exposure we get through things like the Vice magazine interview, or through some of the fantastic television coverage that we've had through SBS and ABC within the last 12 months, then I think as our profile increases, then more and more people are going to be aware of what we're doing, and the right people are going to come on board as we go.
One of the reasons why there's a lot of difficulty is because of the stigma attached to drug use, and especially use of psychedelics or any of the illegal drugs. I was wondering if somebody wanted to touch on some of the issues surrounding stigma of not only the therapeutic use, but also people that are intentionally using something to...
Yeah, I'll quickly touch on that. So some of my PhD research has been looking at the way in which drug use is socially constructed. So obviously all drugs have objective pharmacological effects, but within the dominant society we construct drugs in a particular way, and those constructions are very powerful and are maintained by various institutions within society. So the medical institution has a vested interest in maintaining particular constructions of certain drugs, and the legal enforcement, obviously there's a huge legal industry that has a vested interest in maintaining the prohibition of illegal drugs. And so the stigma then is maintained because of those constructions and those various institutions that have a vested interest in maintaining those constructions. And I think those constructions are extremely powerful, so much so that if you talk to academics, if I talk to fellow psychologists even that may not be familiar with alcohol and other drugs, they will cite many of the myths, such as the various long-term effects of LSD that you've talked about, or talk about, strychnine being a potential contaminant in LSD, and that was even contained in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, the previous edition, which has recently been revised. It has been removed out of the most recent edition, which is positive. But I think it's those constructions of drug use that hold the stigma, and it's that stigma then that because those constructions are so powerful, they are perpetuated even in academia and in psychotherapy and in other areas, and that's what maintains some of the problems that is faced with psychedelic research.
Can I just say something about that as well? I mean, I'm pathetically optimistic, but I think certainly those constructions around the legal side of it are starting to crumble. And you're certainly starting to see law enforcement saying this is a stupid construction and this is not beneficial. And while we've just had the ACC report come out saying, they're doing a brilliant job because they're stopping 10% of the drugs that come into this country, I think there is this underlying recognition that this system is not working. And the stigma comes down to the fact it's the illegality. You can't say... You can say, you tied one on at the pub, but you certainly can't say, you had a great time tripping at Rainbow Serpent. It's in many workplaces that will get you sacked. Still, I mean, it's part of workplace conditions. So, you know, it's to me the illegality is what is the most important part of stigma.
I think just adding to that, it's, you know, what you've said about law enforcement and some of those constructions crumbling. It's typically people who are ex-law enforcement that are able to make those statements, because
and
ex-politicians, people that are no longer having those vested interests are then able to sort of talk the truth and deconstruct some of that stigma. And I think that drugs are not necessarily legal because they're harmful, but because of the vested interest of the law, by having the drugs as illegal, that perpetuates their perception of harm.
Yes.
Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just wondering what our... Oh, sorry, Steph. I'm just wondering what our current leader is going to be thinking in a few years' time when he's not leader anymore, because I can't call him
I'm not sure that he will be much more enlightened than he is now.
I can't call him our fearless leader, because I think he's probably very fearful, but I actually heard him on the radio this afternoon saying that we have to keep the war on drugs going. We know that it can be lost, it can't be won, probably can never be won, but we just have to keep fighting.
Fight the good fight.
I just wanted to make a point on stigma and discrimination as well. Harm Reduction Victoria identifies stigma and discrimination as the greatest harm that people who use drugs experience, and it's good to talk about it on a macro level, like legal institutions systematically stigmatising people, but also you've got to think within the community of people who use drugs, stigmatising people because of particular substances, particular choices, so it's something that people have got to be conscious of on a personal basis as well.
There's another thing that stigma does, I think, and can I grab the audio on this computer for a second, because this was the most eloquent I've ever heard somebody put this, but it sort of perfectly describes the attitude that I think a lot of people have towards psychoactive substances when they don't know about it. So stigma also makes people stupid. This is from a New Zealand mayor. You might have heard in New Zealand they've had a series of novel psychoactive substances legal recently. They've just sort of reneged on that and said, no, we're going to ban them again, but we're going to do some testing, a whole bunch of stuff. Anyway, this is Mayor Bill Dalton talking about what he thinks needs to be done.
And surely they could work out a comprehensive definition of what mind-altering drugs are and ban the lot. Ban every single mind-altering drug. And then look at exceptions such as prescription drugs and other drugs that are covered by existing legislation.
If you've ever read the kind of legislation that these people try and write that bans them all, except those ones, and those ones that we actually need and we like and we enjoy, it turns into a dog's breakfast, and that's exactly what's been happening across Australia. I think there's been more than 30 new bills introduced, Fiona?
Yeah, I think we're probably reaching the 40 mark on amendments to drug misuses acts around the country.
Over the past 5 or so years?
Yeah, probably even 3.5. So, you know, it's groundbreaking work that they're doing in picking up this speed of being able to try and amend drug acts. And one of the most recent ones in Victoria is particularly good, that they've started to use a lot of chemistry-based amendments to say, well, if this has the same hydrogen rings or slightly different hydrogen rings...
Oh, that's just psychoactive effects.
That one's New South Wales, isn't it?
Yeah, that's New South Wales.
So in Victoria, they're using a chemical kind of amendments to say, this way we can catch all drugs that you might be thinking of making, selling, producing. Anyway, we took their definitions to the lab and found that there was an absolute capturing of nicotine and alcohol. And Nick and I put this to the police minister and the mental health minister, and they came back to me saying, Fiona, you're absolutely right. It does capture nicotine. But who in their right mind would consider nicotine a dangerous drug? They honestly said this. And they said... and who in their right mind would think that nicotine would be considered a dangerous drug in the near future? Now, I think we are going to see that in our lifetime, that nicotine is seen, or tobacco. Anyway, this was actually relating to tobacco products, that tobacco products are seen as a dangerous drug in the near future.
So we can sort of see that stigma creates a schism in not only the identity of things like what is a drug and what is dangerous, but also in the identity of people that enjoy these things. And one of the themes that was brought up in the film was that you can be. Everybody's got their own traumas. You don't have to be a cancer patient to need to seek healing. Healing is an experience that all people in life should be able to have, and life has hardships for all people. Psychedelics help people integrate a grand narrative in some ways, but I was wondering if somebody could touch on maybe some of the issues that people might face if they're looking into the psychedelic world. I'm looking at you, Steph.
I thought that's what was happening. Okay, so I'm not sure if you've checked out the Dancewise table out front, or you may have come across us at festivals. Dancewise is an outreach program run through Harm Reduction Victoria. We're set up usually next to first aid, and we have information, so we provide people with accurate, credible information about how to use drugs as safe as you possibly can. And sometimes people do run into some issues, especially if there's polydrug use going on, if people are using drugs over several days, maybe at festivals. And lots of the issues that we encounter, because we do offer a chill-out space as well, lots of the issues that people encounter have to do with really basic things like keeping hydrated and keep eating food. But also people do, end up wanting to take something for pure euphoria, and it brings something else up, and that's okay. People just need to be reassured that it's okay, so long as there's no risk to their immediate health, then they can work through it. It's not a case of telling them exactly what to do, but just sitting there with them, like trip sitting would be how we'd describe it, and just making sure that they have all the comfort and support that they need to work through it.
And Dancewise do fantastic work, so do go check out the table at the end if you haven't already. One of the problems we face in a community that of people that are either interested or actively involved with psychoactive substances is there's no idols, there's no role models. Unless you go and find them, and that can take a lot of time, then there's nobody for you to look to for advice. I was wondering if we could touch on the issue of where are our role models?
Celebrity rehab.
Yeah, damn it. Is there a way we can foster people to be idols, or do you think the stigma is too much for that to... It's too easy to cut down people?
I think in our current culture that we live within, there's not even a solid framework for less harmful use of alcohol. I mean, we live in a culture where it's idealistic to get really fucked up. And then if you apply that framework and start adding in other psychoactive substances into that, that's what probably leads to people that end up coming in touch with some of the Dancewise people. So I think it needs a cultural shift. And if we look at other cultures, so if you look at the use of ayahuasca in its traditional culture, there's a framework there for the individuals to use that medicine. Similarly, if you look at tobacco, when it was used in its traditional setting, there weren't a whole lot of nicotine-dependent individuals there, but a whole lot of Westerners come over, see it, perceive it as a commodity, bring it back to Europe and sell it, and now we've got all the problems that we have with tobacco. So I think what's missing is a solid cultural framework within our society to use drugs.
Sneaky and watchful pigeon informed me that amongst the growing, from what I hear, but it's pigeon talk, so it's hard to decipher, community of ayahuasca users in Australia, there seem to be a lot of role models popping up and people that can look to, but there's also a danger of people that don't really know what they're doing. I just thought that was I probably shouldn't recite the words of pigeons that speak to me.
It struck me in watching the film that, you know, that sense of the ayahuasca ceremony and the spiritual side of that, and the experiments that Rick Doblin was doing with the religious ministers, that really we should get Family First and the Australian Christian Lobby onto this, because if it is kind of going to bring out a lot more spiritual result, that I think they could get right behind this. And
I think it might be the wrong kind of spiritual result we're looking for.
And in many ways, it's a threat to those institutions because they have a vested interest in maintaining the gateway between the people and spirituality. If you give the people ayahuasca, you take out the middleman.
Why did they stop? Why did they stop with the Latin? You know, that kept us safe away from the information.
That was also our sort of last theme that came up in the movie, which is sort of the certainty of politics and how society is structured, and how the different drugs that people take across human history have sort of sent our societies in different directions. You can look at the history of coffee and tea into Western society and the growth of capitalism sometime, if you're interested. But over the past 400 years, that's one of the drugs that's really been that. So I think there probably is a worry among, well, is it a conscious worry? Do you think people are consciously worried that other people are going to step outside of the framework that they've invented for people to operate by if they take a different kind of drug rather than the one we've said drink more to?
I think it depends, because like amphetamine, for example, fits very well with our contemporary Western culture, and I think that's probably why we see a lot of amphetamine use. You know, we live in a 24/7 society. Amphetamines might be able to assist me in being able to be able to live that life. So I think it's a reciprocal relationship. On one hand, the drugs we take foster the culture that we have, but the culture we have drives us towards certain drugs.
Any questions from the audience?
I think it's very interesting that we, just while we're waiting for the mic to come around, very interesting that we have this double standard with certain drugs. So as you mentioned, amphetamine a moment ago, prescription amphetamine is a very significant part of the process, whereas there are relatively few other drugs which have that sort of sanctioned use on the one hand, and then this definitely prohibited use on the other, or misuse or abuse.
There's actually a few, actually, because there's ketamine, and there's that. On one hand, you can look at a poster on ecstasy telling you about, it might contain a horse tranquilizer, yet your local paramedic will probably tell you that it's a very useful drug. So amphetamine, all of the opiates, oxycodone, fentanyl. So there are those drugs that we do have this interesting relationship with, but I think the medical institution, as the gatekeepers of those drugs, are probably scared of some of these other substances because, with Mdma, for example, and LSD, these were drugs that were getting out into the populace, and it was being seen to be problematic. There were all these people high on acid, all these people high on Mdma. Clearly, we're not able to control this, so we need to prohibit this drug.
Whereas people are very controllable on ketamine, is that the idea?
Yeah.
All right. When you ask your question, stand up so everyone can peer at you and we can, make you feel real self-conscious. Say your name too.
Anthony, have any of you guys experimented with ayahuasca on the board? Yeah. Good. How do you see ayahuasca usage in, if it becomes legalized, benefiting our population? What could it offer?
Where do you start? I guess really every journey is different, and every individual's process is different. So there are many dimensions, I think, of benefit that can be taken away from ayahuasca experiences. I think really what we stand to benefit, or how we stand to benefit really, is to open up our wisdom and our acceptance and our capacity to accommodate and embrace other, and also, as was mentioned many times in the film, really to to realise that everything's one, and so that should bring about a much greater perception of humanity.
Like lowering violence and hatred against people because we understand.
I would like to
connection.
think that would be the case.
Yeah, I think this dialogue really questions the definition of medicine, because it's often defined as the curing a disease. But if medicine was defined more as promoting well-being, then you can see goals like curing humanity as something that medicine should strive for.
Hello, I'm Michael. And I've got a question, especially for the PRISM guys, about Ibogaine. And how would the use of Ibogaine as therapy go forward in Australia? Would that be possible?
Who's not familiar with Ibogaine or Ibogaine? Yep. Okay. So Ibogaine is it's a natural product extracted from a West African shrub. It's called Tabernanthe iboga, and it's a very powerful psychedelic, and it was discovered by a gentleman called Howard Lotsof from New York, who had a fairly healthy opiate addiction. That it effectively cured his withdrawal and actually reset his tolerance of opiates back to zero, and so he effectively very quickly overcame his addiction, and was amazed, as many people tend to be. And it's been used globally very far underground for the last 30 or 40 years for substance addiction, particularly opiate addiction. And it acts by, it's a very, apparently, a long and rather tortuous journey of about 30 to 40 hours, I think, on a good run. And it's called, what is it called? Oniric. So it's basically an extended waking dream state. And pharmacologically, it's very interesting in that it has a very wide activity profile at a number of different receptor systems. And so opiate, serotonin, all the way through, right across. But it is only active at fairly high doses. So part of the issue is that it's also very hard on the system, very hard on the body. Ibogaine would be a fantastic adjunct, I think, to addiction therapies. As I understand it at the moment, and unfortunately we don't have Torsten, our legal expert, with us right at the moment, but I think it's actually not specifically outlawed as a plant in Australia, but I think the purified compound is, and so that's a little bit of an issue. Anyway, interestingly enough, there's an observational study taking place in New Zealand. So there's a fellow from the University of Dunedin, or Otago in Dunedin, who is not actually administering Ibogaine, but is following substance users who book themselves into Ibogaine clinics, and of which there are a few, I gather, in New Zealand, and who are willing to participate in the research. And the results so far have been quite promising. So it'd be great, and in fact PRISM has as one of its sort of stated missions to see if we could eventually bring about a change in the system overall to bring Ibogaine into addiction therapies in Australia.
Thanks for that question. Interesting question. Next question over this side of the room somewhere.
Considering one of the main points is abuse, when it comes to hallucinogenics and any other tool, really that's all they are. They are tools, and if used appropriately, they can be beneficial. Whatever they are, amphetamines, alcohol, nicotine, I think they can all be beneficial in the correct dosage, the right environment. Where's the line with hallucinogenic abuse?
The line with abuse of psychedelics, for anyone didn't hear, or hallucinogenic abuse.
Use and abuse is again, it's a social construction. So if you go back to the previous diagnostical and statistical manual of mental disorders, it was a clear definition of what alcohol and other drug abuse is, with a series of criteria. But whether that is or isn't drug abuse is defined by a group of psychiatrists that sit around and define where that line in the sand might be drawn. I think it's really good that that term's actually been taken out of the most recent DSM, and the International Classifications of Disease, which is produced by the World Health Organization, uses the term harmful use as a way of defining it. And I think that's probably a good way of sort of answering a question. The difference is it causing yourself and other people harm? If so, then that's probably not a good thing.
Just quickly, before we move on, that separation between what is use and what is abuse is particularly important because it is something that's distorted constantly by people that are upholding a certain paradigm. Mary Wooldridge, who's the Minister for Mental Health in Victoria, for example, in the start of the Victorian drug something report, I can't remember the full name of it, but said that the abuse of alcohol and use of drugs is a problem to society because she equates, and a lot of people will do this, equate usage to abuse. Any kind of usage of an illicit drug is considered abuse. And just going on as well, in the film they mentioned Schedule 1 and 2. That's in America, and in Australia, for those who don't know, we have Schedule 9 is our sort of highest lockdown category at the Commonwealth level, but we also have different laws at the state level, and they have to enact the Commonwealth level. It's a mess. And in Schedule 9, things are considered to have absolutely no therapeutic use, high potential for abuse, and just to be generally bad news, and that's where a lot of the most popular illicit substances that you may or may not be aware of or have come in contact with at some point are. Question? I think there was some down the front. Yep.
Hello. Hi. I guess this is based kind of on Stephen was talking about as in regards to the institutionalisation or institutional vested interest in drugs. But it's really, I guess, a question for Fiona. I think at the moment it wouldn't be unfair to say that we've seen a lot of politics that play to the lowest common denominator of our emotions and our emotional responses, especially in regards to refugees, drugs, sexuality, etc. Would you say that within the political sphere, which is also a huge generator of public opinion, as well as one that is supposedly only reacting to public opinion, that there is any kind of, I mean, it's very nice that you're here, but is there a sentiment within your sphere of this kind of thing changing, or are you a lone pariah / something else?
No, I certainly think there is a movement. There is some movement, and I am as I openly admit, I'm just a pathetic optimist, but I do see it, and unfortunately, what I do see, which is the most frustrating thing, is that you speak to members of Parliament about drug use and about drug law reform, and they're all nodding their heads. And they're all agreeing with you. But then there'll be something like, I hold this seat by 4%. So I totally agree with you. And I know that in actual fact, the majority of Australians would agree that the current legislation that we have does not work. However, I hold this seat by 4%. So if I take a position on drug use that's not prohibitionist, then that 4% might not vote for me, and I won't get my pension, and I won't have my job at the end. So they, while they understand that there is a large proportion of the population, and while they themselves, many of them, will have been like all of us that have experienced drug use in one form or another and probably had pleasant experiences, they are not willing to put their hands up. I think having parties like ourselves or the Hemp Party or other progressive parties in there to stir that pot and to get that debate happening is hopefully a way forward, and to bring those people along.
I think from a policy perspective, for change, there needs to be that window of opportunity, and there's little windows of opportunity all the time. Unfortunately, it's usually when someone dies. But when something major happens, there's a window of opportunity, and hopefully if somebody such as yourself is able to leverage that, then there's a potential for change.
I think we had a question over this side.
Any paramedic student knows that suicide is something that's present in that community. You know, it's there and it's apparent, and people know people that have died, and it's something that's there. I'm just wondering, as part of your work in trying to facilitate a study in Australia, have you reached out to those kinds of organisations like the Ambulance Union, and are they on board? And maybe if some of the other people want to speak about other allies out in the community.
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, the Secretary of PRISM is a veteran himself. He's a veteran of the Somalia conflict, and who has suffered suffers PTSD, but has suffered PTSD acutely in the past. So he's quite well connected in veterans organisations and so on already. Very good call on the ambulance and other, I guess, other organisations that are in contact with that situation on a daily basis. So well worth following up. We don't have that level of contact at this stage because I think it's still quite early days. But we certainly have some connections both through Steve and also through the gentleman who's, well, hopefully Nigel, who's going to be involved in the therapeutic side of things for us as well.
I think it was really interesting in the medicinal cannabis debate that's sadly been going on for such a long time. But one of the first supporters of medicinal cannabis that came out publicly was the Australian Country Women's Association. And that was an incredibly unlikely supporter of this. And they have remained steadfast in that support. And they have had a policy for 12 years now to support medicinal cannabis being available in country areas. So yeah, I agree. I think it is looking outside the box for those allies that you might not expect, and certainly, you know, you can see Ruxton up there with the Returned Servicemen's Club, you know, promoting, you know, MDMA at their local RSL.
One day.
I'd go.
And another question over this side.
Just while they're doing that, I think Rick Doblin has been very strategic in his way of getting some allies on board. So one of their studies has looked at first responders, so firefighters and police, and sort of highlighting the irony, I guess, of treating a police officer who may have experienced trauma from trying to get MDMA off the street with the same drug that he was trying to take it off the street.
That is poetic.
I'd like to ask a question about the responsibility that we ourselves take in being role models for society, coming from this perspective. Any comments on that?
Yep, you go.
Well, like one of the kind of mantras of DanceWise is to dance wise. So if we're at a party, we try practice what we preach. If we're telling people, you know your substance, consider your mindset and your setting, and then we go ahead and do something completely different, that would be irresponsible. So, I mean, within the dance community, there is a lot of role modelling, and there's, like, it's not just a case of us giving information out, it's definitely a conversation. We learn so much from the people we encounter. So, yeah, like a community kind of approach to knowledge, I think is important.
I think the stigma is potentially a barrier for some sort of role modelling. Like, given my background in psychology, I certainly find it difficult to publicly sort of become some sort of role model for safer, less harmful drug use. You know, through my own use, I can certainly talk to people about harm reduction, but it's very difficult to sort of draw on my own experiences. I think one of the things that's missing in terms of our drug education is that we're getting better with alcohol. We do harm reduction now with alcohol, so we talk to kids about, you know, if your mate gets too drunk, don't leave him on the street. Bring him home, take him somewhere safe. We haven't quite got there with other drugs yet. It would be really good with drug education if we could talk about, well, you know, you need to think about what the effect is of the drug. You know, what's the effect that you're looking for, so you match that with the right drug. Because, you know, if you're looking for some nice euphoria, then maybe, you know, 25-IM is not the right drug for you. And I think that's where we've seen some unfortunate incidences recently in society in Australia.
I think the psychedelic movement had so shell-shocked after the sort of the 60s and the aftermath of the hippie era that it's very important, it has proven to be very important to sort of reassess how that role modelling should take place. And so what we saw in the film, of course, was some extremely articulate people who spoke with authority. They probably spoke with the authority of experience, but they didn't actually talk about their own experiences as such. So they were able to sort of separate their own personal sort of context from what they were talking about, but they still obviously had the experience behind them to be persuasive and to be positive about things, I guess. So really, if we can achieve a similar level of sort of articulation and engage at all levels with society, I guess, all the way through. We're doing a pretty reasonable job with the media at the moment, I think. But of course, we have to be able to talk with the politicians, and we have to be able to talk to the people on the street as well.
We've just about run out of time. I've got one final little video from the founder, I believe, of the Drug Policy Alliance in the US.
Hello, Neurons to Nirvana viewers in Australia. I'm Ethan Nadelman. I'm the founder and executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance, a U.S. organization working internationally based here in New York. And I've been asked to say a few words to you about where psychedelics fits into the whole world of drug policy reform. Now, I know most of you are interested in psychedelics and the pleasures and benefits of using them and how to minimize the harmful aspects. I mean, for me, I have to be honest, that's oftentimes been my principal relationship with the psychedelics as well. And Drug Policy Alliance doesn't focus on that area of policy reform. I'm indebted to Rick Doblin and his organization MAPS and the Hefter Society and others for their work in that area. But I really do think it's important that as you think about and use and everything else with the psychedelics, to understand the relationship between what you're doing and what you're experiencing and the laws and policies and attitudes around that and the broader drug policy reform movement. I mean, we all on some level believe in the good drugs versus the bad drugs, and the psychedelics are by and large the good drugs, and those others, meth or whatever, are the bad ones. But we have to understand that there is a core principle that many of us believe in and are fighting for, which is that nobody but nobody deserves to be punished simply for what we put into our bodies, so long as it doesn't do any harm to anybody else. And that principle has to apply with respect to the drugs and the consumers of drugs that we regard as more elevated, as well as to those who consume the drugs that we regard as more fearful and as more problematic. Let's remember, we don't want to take our own, we don't want to imitate the biases of the broader society. Ultimately, when it talks about freedom in your society and mine around the world, and the freedom not to be punished for choosing to put what we want to in our own bodies, as long as we don't hurt other people, that's part of a broader struggle. That's the struggle to stop people being sent to prison and jail simply for what they put in their body. It's the struggle to treat addiction seriously as a health issue, which may of course include the role of psychedelics in addressing addiction. It's the struggle against the racial discrimination and prejudice that permeates the drug war in your society and mine and most others. So enjoy your psychedelics as I do mine, but please keep in mind and remember, there's a broader political struggle that we're all part of, and we need every person to step up and do what they can. Thanks so much, and enjoy the film.